Hi, and welcome to or back to my channel. I'm Kit, and here we talk about the harmful beliefs and ideas that come from religion, red pill, and so on. And today we're discussing Milena Ciciotti's instructions as to how to actually submit to your husband. Milena Ciciotti is a YouTuber with over 600,000 subscribers, and from the looks of it, she's always been open about being a Christian. But lately it seems she's taken a hard right turn. In September, I did commentary on her Submission Isn't What We Think It Is video, where she claimed that 99% of the world are Jezebels. Not what I was expecting, but she did promise this would be a series, and true to her word, here is the second video. How to actually submit to your husband, part 2, the application. And as we all know, I love examples of what submit to your husband looks like in practice. Before we begin, I'm sure my regular viewers know, but for any new folks that wander by, I have no problems with Christians in general, married people, or whatever other weird thing people want to accuse me of being against. My problem is with submission. A person should not submit to another person. You can learn to discuss and compromise like an adult without submission. And you know, if that's what you want to do, it's your life. When an influencer encourages it, however, that's when I bring out the microphone and ring light. And with all that being said, let's learn, again, what this submission thing is about. And before we get into it, I would like to note that I don't know Milena, and these are my thoughts and opinions on the content she puts out for public consumption. That being said, thank you for joining me, and I would like to give extra thanks to my patrons. The video opens with a Proverbs 31 title card, and I bet even non-Christians watching know that that's the verse about how precious a virtuous wife is. Milena tells us that these are foundational episodes, so we should watch the first video before this one, so I'm going to link my commentary on part 1 in the cards. That's pretty much it for the intro, though Milena does call submission an obligation, which I found interesting. She also says that this is a daily struggle.
This has been something that I've been having to ask the Lord day in and day out what that looks like for me. Because submission is something that I think, like a lot of women, it goes so against my flesh and so against my will. And I literally have to die to myself every single day because just naturally, my flesh does not want to be submissive. Naturally, my flesh wants to talk. Naturally, my flesh wants to make my opinion known. Naturally, I want to control instead of being self-controlled.
I would say this is my main issue with submission. No matter who's talking about it, it always involves women dying to self and learning to be quiet. There is nothing wrong with talking. There is nothing wrong with having opinions. And it's interesting that, rather than learn how to voice opinions in a respectful way and learn to compromise, these folks turn to submission. I can only imagine how uncomfortable it must be to live that way. But if you don't,
if you are not submitting to your husband, you are actively and choosing to walk in disobedience day in and day out. And if you are choosing to walk in submission to your husband, you are choosing to walk in obedience to the Lord. And I really think we need to wrap our minds around how deep and how serious this is.
I get a lot of comments on these videos, mainly the Loki's Life one, about how submission is biblical and what's the harm? It's her life, and yes, everyone is free to submit to whoever they want. But this is the harm, this is the part I object to. I don't care how people choose to live, but when they want to preach these hardline beliefs, this, you must do it this way or you're in sin, that is when I have to say something. I know my word won't be taken as seriously as a Christian's, but I can't just say nothing. And on that note, B. Haney has done a video on Milena's first submission video and plans to cover the second as well. So if you would like a Christian perspective on this, I'll link to B's video below, along with The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. Moving on, Milena states that she wants to make it clear that if you are in a mental or physically abusive relationship, this doesn't apply to you, and I am glad she adds this. That's more than most bother doing. However,
if you are a wife with a husband who probably plays too many video games or can be a little bit lazy sometimes or is a little bit grumpy when he gets home from work, this still applies to you. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that we are only to submit to our husbands if they are perfect and act like Jesus. We did not marry Jesus, we married our husbands. And so we cannot hold our husbands to the standard of Jesus when we don't even hold ourselves to that standard.
But shouldn't he be striving to be like Jesus? Basically, men can do whatever they like and their wives are still to submit. And in fact, per her last video, wives aren't even to say anything. That would be nagging, so wives just need to pray that their husband's heart will be changed and he'll stop being grumpy after work or he'll play less video games. This is just so strange to me, and we're not even 5 minutes in. Anyway, Milena goes to the Bible and tells us that submitting to your husband is foundational, and if you can't even do that, you won't be able to do anything else the Bible commands of wives. And if you're wondering where the Bible verses are, Milena does read them, but I'm skipping them in this video because I'm just here to learn what submission looks like to her. Anyway, Milena advises women to ask their husbands how they feel respected because, of course, she believes in the whole men need respect and women need love.
But for a man, it is so foundational for them that if they don't feel respected by you, they won't feel loved by you, they won't feel admired by you, they won't feel protective over you. Like, it becomes a domino effect of things. And so for them to feel respected by you is so empowering to them and can make them feel like such a man.
Right, but if women are to submit even when their husbands aren't perfect, aren't husbands supposed to feel protective of their wives even if their wives aren't perfect? Anyway, Milena says that it's so natural for wives to want to nag and control their husbands, but the Bible says you're to control yourself, not your husband. From here, we talk about why God even made women, and if you're wondering, it's to be a helper. And Milena at least notes that men aren't all the same, so what makes one man feel respected might not apply to all men. Milena calls for women to get a PhD in their husband, and you can do so by asking him questions about what makes him feel respected, what you've done in the past or present to make him feel respected, what you've done to make him feel disrespected, and she's really hammering the idea that men need respect. Milena shares that her husband feels respected when she sees him as their protector. And I was hoping for an example because when you see me as a protector, I feel respected is so nebulous. What does that mean? Every bump in the night, she wakes him up to investigate? When she sees a spider, she calls for him? But instead, we get this.
It just goes to show how biblical that is, because husbands are called to protect and to provide. And so, of course, it goes to show how God has just ordained us and God has made us these desires and how he so beautifully created us, because my husband feels respected when I view him as our protector.
Yeah, I still have questions, but anyway, Milena says if you haven't been under submission to your husband, it will be slow steps, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around the idea of an adult willingly submitting to another adult. I know that kink exists, but I'm trying to imagine it in a if I don't do this, I'm in sin way, and nope. And I was raised Lutheran, but there was no talk about submission. That this is supposed to be biblical blows my mind. And every single woman who talks about submission tells us how difficult it was and is for her, and I'm just like, maybe because it's not natural? I don't understand the logic of a God that places humans on earth, all with their own wants, hopes, dreams, desires, and then decrees that one sex is to submit to the other because of their sex. It just doesn't make any sense. I know it's supposed to be about dying to self and all that, but why is it always women? Why do women have to die to self and live to serve? Yes, I know men have their responsibilities as well, but in the same breath, these women tell other women they need to submit. They remind women that it's not their place to tell men what they're to do. So men just get to do whatever they like with the belief that, well, if they behave badly on earth, they'll pay for it in the afterlife. And honestly, that reads like some patriarchal BS thought up thousands of years ago to keep women down, and not the logical thought process of an omniscient deity. Anyway, actually, I have one more thing.
I'm submitting to my husband because I want to submit to Christ and be obedient to him.
These women keep saying, ladies, remember, you didn't marry Jesus, so you can't expect perfection. However, they treat husbands like stand-ins for Jesus. So basically, if you're a husband in one of these religions, you get all of the benefit and none of the expectation. Okay, rant over for real now. Milena talks about how she loves her husband, but she's looking beyond to the greater mission, and I would like to take this moment to remind everyone that these folks vote. From here, we turn to Peter, and Milena notes that this is heavy on women and wives because she doesn't have the authority to talk to men, and I'm just wondering where the application comes in because it's sounding very similar to part 1. Anyway, Milena considers doing a video about men's responsibilities, not to shame them, but to show that they have the larger burden.
They are going to go before the Lord, and they will have to be judged and testify whether they led you and your children correctly. All we will have to do before we stand the Lord is say if whether we were in submission to our husbands or not. But our husbands are responsible not only for themselves, but you and your children.
So there we are, ladies. Just be grateful you only have to submit. Is it weird that I would rather take responsibility for myself before God? Anyway, Milena reads from Peter and says this is an instruction manual for how to win your husband without a word, and this is for all husbands.
Any of you who have husbands who are not Christians, they're not going to be won over by you nagging them to come to church on Sunday. They're going to be won over without a word, but by your conduct.
Is it just me, or does it sound like simply having a conversation with your husband about something important to you is considered nagging? Just act right and he'll come around? No need to state your wishes. God will work on your husband's heart. I guess if you believe prayer is the answer to everything, there isn't really much need to have discussions with your husband, but if he's to love you like Christ loved the church, shouldn't he want to talk to you and find out what you want or need from him? Anyway, Milena wants us to walk through these qualities wives are supposed to have, and if you're wondering what those are, being respectful, and Milena assumes that men are out working all day while the wives are at home, and then pure conduct. Milena would like us to do some homework for this one. We're to search through our Bibles to see what it says about being pure, and she notes it goes beyond sexually and to being sober-minded. Per Milena, the world laughs at the idea of being pure and considers it unobtainable, which is a lie from the enemy. The next quality is adorning, and Milena says it's one thing to want to look presentable and beautiful to your husband, but another thing for it to be a lustful thing for other men. She also mentions being a gentle and quiet spirit, which is about how you carry yourself and if you're being wise with your words. She adds that being gentle and quiet is contrary to how we live today, and there's a lot of unlearning that needs to be done. And if you have a husband that's easily upset, you should consider how you're reacting and responding. Why do I have the feeling that if it was a wife who was easily upset, she would be calling upon the wife to reflect on her behavior, not the husband to reflect on his? Anyway, we move on to Titus, and Milena tells us that we are to love our husbands and children, which I would think is a given, but Milena goes on to ask what love means, and then we go to Corinthians because definitions are important.
It is telling us to be patient and kind, to not envy or boast, to not be arrogant or rude, to not insist on our own way, to not be irritable or resentful, to not rejoice in wrongdoing but rejoice in the truth, to believe all things, hope on all things, endure all things, and to never end our love. Wow, that's a whole lot. I know, it seems like a whole lot. If you've not memorized this verse, I'm giving you a little more homework. Let's memorize this first. How can we apply this to our life? We need to be patient with our husband. Let's say our husband said he'd be home at 5 and he ends up being home at 5:45. And I know sometimes at the end of the day, all you're doing is just waiting and every minute seems like an hour. And so when he walks through the door and he's 45 minutes late, the last thing you want to do is be patient. But love is patient and kind. So we need to be understanding. Okay, I see you got caught up, or maybe traffic was a little bit longer. I'm sorry you were stuck in the car. Love can look like this. It's in the small things. It's in the little mundane things that happen day in and day out. Love is not arrogant or rude. How often are we rude or arrogant to our husbands? How often do we think we need to be right? And if we're not right, we're arrogant, or we know best, or he didn't listen to your advice. Oh, well, see, that's what happens. I know best. That is being arrogant. That is being rude. It is not loving. It does not insist on its own way. It's literally telling us right here how to even be submissive with love. It does not insist on its own way. It literally just unlocked this for us right here. It's literally telling us in order to submit and to love someone, you can't insist on your own way, because insisting on our own way is so prideful and so arrogant because we think we know best. We don't. And submitting to our husbands and the way he wants to do something, sure, it may not be the way you prefer to do it, but that's not biblical. That's not what we're called to do.
So, to be clear, submission is not insisting on your own way. And not insisting on your own way is part of what love is. And husbands are to love their wives. How is she, and other women who preach this, ignoring this very obvious call for mutual submission? Anyway, obviously people should love and respect their partners, but the examples given here are just, it's not controlling to want a text if someone is going to be late. It's not controlling to want to know why your partner is going to be late. And honestly, if someone comes home at 5:30 every night and it's 6 and they're still not here, I'm going to worry. But I guess that would be controlling. Husbands should feel free to do whatever, whenever, and wives just shouldn't worry about it. He'll have to account for it before God.
I think the biggest thing that women oftentimes struggle with when it comes to submission is that they don't want to be controlled. They want to be controlling.
So submission is about being controlled then? I appreciate the honesty. There's a big difference between I don't want to be controlled and I want to control others. I don't want to be controlled. I also have no desire to control other people. In fact, I imagine most people would like to be controlled as much as I would, which is not at all. That is not hard to understand, and though I know there are people who treat manipulation as a sport, I have a hard time believing that women will just be horribly controlling monsters if they don't submit. And honestly, if someone does have the desire to control everyone around them, they're not the ones hearing this and thinking, I better start submitting. Anyway, Milena at last gives an example of submission.
I started with submission in the car because I found that I was that little wife in the corner. I was sitting my side, I was being the passenger, and I was the type of passenger that would dictate and try to help my husband drive. And by telling him, oh, we have to turn here, or oh, are you going to get over? Or oh, there's a car coming. And I found that I was trying to control and trying to dictate how he was driving, and I wasn't being submissive in even that.
So basically, she was the worst passenger. I also am a nervous passenger, but I refrain from backseat driving because I'm worried about being a distraction. Apparently that means I'm submissive in the car. I'm a car submissive. But really, she makes her husband sound like a terrible driver.
And I would just enjoy being in my husband's presence instead of being irritated if he missed the turn, or instead of being irritated that he may have gone over the speed limit a little bit, or trying to tell him that he needs to turn into the lane a little bit sooner so he doesn't have to do it abruptly.
I don't think backseat driving is a good habit, or honestly helpful to the driver, but if someone needs help with directions, they need help with directions. Granted, everyone I know would ask if they need help rather than missing turns, but I don't run with a women must submit crowd. Obviously, given that I've been alone in a car with men I'm not married to. Anyway, after that, submission got easier because car rides were more peaceful and she felt more free because she was no longer trying to control. This is weird though.
I was trying to have authority in areas I wasn't supposed to have authority.
I was unaware that the Bible told us who had authority over driving. Anyway, Milena says that God called for a specific structure and order in the home because that's how he designed it. Convincing. Anyway, when we go against God's design, there's going to be interference, resistance, and disobedience, and this makes no sense. If submission is God's design, then it shouldn't be something you struggle with. Yes, I know, fallen world and all that, but there should be some sort of inner peace or something that goes along with doing God's will. Otherwise, going against God's design or going with it, you're never content. Or is that supposed to be humanity's torment for eating that apple? Anyway, Milena says that submission applies to life in general and asks how much more freedom we would have if we were in submission to the Lord and our husbands. I don't think these folks know what freedom means. Similar to the first video, she goes off again about how she can only control herself and it takes a lot of patience and relying on the Holy Spirit to win over your husband, and for that reason we can't do this on our own, and to think we can is very foolish. And I'm just confused and wondering what we're winning our husbands over for. Or are we going at this from the understanding that the husband in question isn't a Christian and thus needs to be won over to become a believer? Anyway, Milena says we have to roll this up, and the next one is pure, and because it's mentioned 2 times, that should really send up alarms, because if the Bible mentions something 2 times, that means you really have to be listening. She says the Bible isn't filled with filler words, and it's the living and breathing Word of God, so we should really take note when it mentions something twice. Noted. The next thing is taking care of the home and kids, which we thankfully breeze through pretty quickly, and then we get to kind and submissive to their own husband. Milena doesn't think it's a coincidence that this is mentioned more than once, and says that being kind to your husband is the most respectful thing you can do. And, well,
how often are we the meanest people to our husbands?
I don't have a husband, so I can't really answer that, but if you would like to tell me in the comments how often you're mean to your husband, please feel free.
The man that we claim to love the most is the one that we're speaking the most harsh to, is the one that we're putting down the most. Of course your husband isn't wanting to come home. You just throw the kids at him and the house is a mess and you're talking his ear off. That's not pleasant to come home to. I think we forget how we treat our husbands sometimes.
I really enjoy her continued assumption that all women are stay-at-home wives and mothers. Anyway, I do think it's too easy to take your partner for granted, but if you have no will to clean the house and you can't wait for your husband to come home so you can shove the kids off on him, submission isn't the answer. There's something going on there and it should be discussed. Possibly in therapy. Submission would just put a band-aid on it. and whatever the reason, nothing would actually be solved. Anyway, Milena poses a question I found interesting.
But like, how are you even treating your husband? Are you treating him like the man that you love the most on this earth, the man that you chose to take a covenant before the Lord and marry? Or are you treating him like a complete stranger off the side of the road that you completely despise?
Well, I don't know, because to me, a lot of this sounds like husbands and wives are essentially strangers who perform their gendered roles but don't otherwise have a connection. And honestly, if someone does have a problem with the decisions their husband makes, but they're supposed to just keep submitting and pray about it, the lack of discussion, in my opinion, would render the husband more or less a stranger to her, and having to just keep submitting and praying would likely build resentment. And then there is love.
And we have to go back to what 1 Corinthians 13 says. Love does not keep any record of wrong. Sure, your husband is a sinner and he will do things that will really piss you off. He will do things that are wrong. He actually will do things that will really hurt you. But love is patient. It's kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It keeps no record of wrong.
Yeah, I can see how this sort of thing would nurture resentment. Milena goes on to say that the grace God has for us needs to be the same amount that we extend to our husband and kids, and if your husband has done really hurtful things, well,
take those to the feet of Jesus. Keeping record of those things and bringing them up over his head every single time you guys get into an argument is not showing respect. It's not showing love. It's not showing kindness.
I understand that if you forgive, you have to forgive. You can't say you do and then keep bringing up whatever needed the forgiveness in the first place. But continuing to hurt your partner is also not showing respect or showing love or showing kindness. Anyway, Milena reminds us that this is bigger than submitting to our husbands. This is us submitting to God, and again, with the conflation of husband and God. She adds that God isn't asking us to keep record of what our husbands are doing, we are to keep record of what we're doing. And then this.
I just want to make sure that we're all understanding that this is the most biblical thing. I'm not just like whipping this out of my butt. I'm not just whipping this out because I'm having fun telling you all these things, because they're not very pleasant things to talk about and no one is really talking about it. And I feel like that's why the Lord has burdened my heart for this so much, because we need to be talking about this.
No one is talking about this? How many videos about female submission do I have on my channel? And there's way more people that talk about it than I've covered. And no doubt, even more than I don't even know about. Anyway, Milena says something about there will be a huge wave of movement within the church and within women if this does happen. She goes on to say that the world changes within the home, so I think she's saying that submission will become a big thing if you practice it within your home for your kids to see and thus emulate. And then we go to practical things, which is what I was here for, and which we don't seem to be getting much of. We start with what to do in a moment of conflict.
Pick a nice and lovely word for you to reference your husband as, such as honey, my love, sweetie, my boo-boo, my boo bear, my googie, my daddy.
What?
I literally don't care. Think of a sweet word that your husband likes, and when you are in moments of arguments or it is a heated moment, reference and call him that.
Right. So you're supposed to call him that because it should cool down the argument. Is it weird that I've never had a heated argument with anyone outside of family? My parents did and do, and I decided that I wasn't going to. And I didn't have to call anyone daddy or convince myself to submit. It's just being an adult and listening to what the other person has to say and not raising your voice. Is it really that difficult? I know some people are more contentious than others, but I don't really enjoy conflict, so I don't tend to date those types of people. Also, part of my issue with call him a sweet word is that some advice about how to be feminine includes being childlike, but that is for another video. Anyway, Milena has noticed that saying you are right tends to cause conflict.
Now you're probably looking at me like, Milena, you're being a doormat. No, I'm not. I'm just choosing and being wise with when I choose to say my words. And I know that in the heat of an argument, telling him that I'm right is not only not submissive, it's disrespectful and it's foolish.
Admitting when someone else is right isn't being a doormat. I would say it takes a lot of maturity to be able to admit that, especially during an argument. But it sounds as though she's saying that when it's not true, and I'm not really sure how useful that is. Flat out telling someone, I'm right and you're wrong, probably isn't going to help anything, but that is where listening to hear and not argue comes into play. You can also take breaks to regroup and try discussing again when you're both feeling calmer. but I guess that wouldn't be submissive. Anyway, Milena actually gives an example of this.
Like, I remember one time we were arguing over, I think my husband got upset because we didn't have enough soap in the house. And he was like, you need to buy more soap. And I was like, yes, honey, you're right. I do need to. Boom. Flustered situation, went down to 0, and we moved on.
Or he could just say, could you buy more soap? Anyway, Milena says that I agree with you is another phrase that causes arguments because it reminds you all that you're on the same team and it's you and your husband against
the enemy.
The enemy is after your marriage from the second you even decide you want to be together. Like, the enemy is after your marriage all day long. He's after your bed. He's after your children. He's after it. And he's furious that you have a marriage before the Lord. Like, that alone infuriates him. So if you're going to be a submissive wife, oof, he's really threatened by you.
Right. Does anyone ever feel like the enemy is a catch-all term to mean anything they don't like? I'm sure my being against women submitting makes me the enemy, but
I'm just a person.
Anyway, Milena would like us to know that she doesn't know everything, and submission gets easier the more you do it, and now she submits to even the silliest of things. And her current struggle is time.
I am very time oriented. I love to be on time and early for things. And my husband is not. He's the opposite of me. He is the type of man that when he gets into conversation, his whole heart is in that conversation. And so he loses track of time. And I think that's beautiful because that shows that he's more interested in a person's soul. He's more interested in community and talking to a person than silly time. And so this has definitely humbled me in a lot of areas because the Lord's really just showed me how beautiful my husband's heart is and how much wrong I had.
It's wild to me that Milena somehow spun this into how her husband has a beautiful heart, and she was so wrong. But that is pretty much it for this video. Milena says she has so much more she wants to share regarding sex and submission and regarding day-to-day, and I did think this video would be about the day-to-day, but I don't understand this fixation with submission, and it's so dangerous. I have known naturally submissive people and the things they have gone through. Being submissive does not make people want to protect you. And I really don't like how folks like Milena portray men or women. Men are shallow nothings and women are contentious harpies. My theory still stands. These videos are passive-aggressive digs at their husbands and they don't care to do the work to have functional relationships. It sounds as though they've just checked out. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.